Other countries were getting back to where they were before they crashed, not the U.S., especially not in a crucial area, which is private investment, which is when a company invests, says, I'm going to bet on the future, that I'm going to grow in the future. That figure was negative. You just don't see GDP where it's supposed to be for years and years and years. The culture of prosecution extended to other people as well. Two prosecutions that I followed. I have a chapter called A Year of Prosecutions, because the Roosevelt administration prosecuted when it saw its New Deal wasn't going very well. It prosecuted sort of to make the argument, just like when you're angry. The two prosecutions that went throughout the 30s, one was Mellon, the Greenspan. They prosecuted him all the way, all along. And the second was Insull, the Chicago electricity magnate. They were both prosecuted and prosecuted. They were exonerated, but they were still having court issues, troubles when they died. Mellon died in the summer of 1937. Insull, the electricity magnate, who was sort of the Bill Gates of the day, died in Paris in the metro. So imagine if today we were prosecuting Greenspan and, I don't know, the founder of Google, year in, year out, year in, year out. And the government was continuously saying they are to blame for the trouble of the economy. That's not a good environment for business. Business was terrified. I spoke a lot about the cost of economic uncertainty in my book, and you clearly see it's precluding recovery. I think even the argument that Roosevelt had to do what he did to save our democracy from going the way of Russia, or going the way of Germany, or going the way of France is suspect. If you actually look at what Americans were like in that period, yes, sure, there were demagogues. There was Father Coughlin, you'll read about him, or Huey Long of Louisiana. But you do not get the sense that the country is about to go crazy. Indeed, the country is very calm, even in the darkest hours. There was a European writer I like very much named Odette Coyne who came to look at the labor revolution subsequent to the passage of the Wagner Act, which was the big labor law. And she came here looking for revolution like in Europe, but she did not find it. She said she was honest too. A lot of these people were very honest in their writings, and to be admired for that. She said, the flabbergasting thing that I have found on my trip to the Tennessee Valley Authority is that American labor is conservative. It does not want revolution like in Europe. So even the argument that we had to do this to save democracy, I found upon looking at the data suspect. Another myth that everyone believed the Depression was forever, so we had to do it, it also does not hold. There were plenty of people who knew that if the monetary situation were better, I'm not talking about monetary today, it's a big factor, but that's another talk. If the monetary situation were better, if the fiscal situation were better, if the government would not attack business, that the economy would recover. One of the most important moments for me in the book and in the period, Mellon, when he's on trial, imagine a very old man on trial, his 80th birthday, he's feeling, you would expect him to be a little bit sad. He's 80 and he's being tried, but he was kind of buoyant. And the reporters all come running up to him, Mr. Mellon, a comment on your 80th birthday. And he said, forgive me if I paraphrase here because I don't know the text, I'll tell you that this depression is just a bad quarter hour in the glorious history of American growth. But when he said that, that sounded absurd because the depression went from 29 to 40, and you can believe that people thought it was absurd. But you know what? Mellon was right. The depression is one decade out of so many decades of growth that we've marked in our history now. And why do I know this and why can I write this? Because we grew up in the 80s and the 90s and this decade, and that's an awful lot of growth when you add it up that the country has experienced since World War II. It was just a bad quarter hour, and people like Mellon were saying it all the time, but the people in power had a political commitment to arguing perpetual depression or downturn. The entitlement, Social Security, could they have been shaped differently? Yes, they were not set in stone. We imagined them handed down like tablets. They were not set in stone. The entitlements were hotly contested when they were written, or this original entitlement, Social Security. What I do in the book is track the legislation for Social Security. And when the administration puts it forward, there is someone who protests. It's a lawmaker named Bennett Champ Clark, and he says, fine, create Social Security, something for old people. It's very important to have at this time, but maybe it's not the only system. Let's allow competition. Let's allow businesses that already have a pension plan for their employees to opt out of this government program. Then we can have a genuine experiment and see down the years, down the decades, who yields the better returns, the private sector argument or the government program. Well, it was very hot in Washington the summer that this happened, 35, and he argued and argued, but he didn't prevail. They bought him out by saying, oh, Mr. Clark, you can have a commission to look into your alternative after we pass our law. And you know when they say that the idea is dead. And indeed, the idea of an alternate version of companies having their own pensions and seeing if that's better than Social Security was dead, and we had only Social Security. So I think, when we grew up, we learned it had to be this way. It did not have to be this way. A lot of it is historical accident. Getting very much towards the end, the late 1930s weren't just vaguely bad. They were horrible. My book begins with a 13-year-old boy who hangs himself in his brother's bedroom in their house because he didn't want to ask for any more food. He wanted his siblings and his mother to have more food. It's like Oliver Twist. His name was William Troller, and they arranged a little funeral for him at the police department. This boy hanging himself did not happen in 1929. It was in 1937, many years into the New Deal and many, many years after the initial crash of 29. In the downturn in the later 30s, we call it the forgotten depression, or the depression within the depression. The unemployment was 2 in 10. Imagine 2 in 10 unemployment. That's 8 years later than the crash. A whole decade where very often 2 in 10 unemployment was the rule. Why did that depression within the depression happen? In the book, I spend a lot of energy on it, and I show it's because the market was terrified of the government. This was a true capital strike. Finally, the measure of Roosevelt's success, the political success, yes, was very real. He had 46 out of 48 states. By the political poll, he was the highest you can go in the United States. But we want to recall that there are 2 other meters that are important to us beyond the vote by which Roosevelt flunked, and by which both Hoover and Roosevelt, in fact, flunked. One is unemployment, and the other is the Dow, which did not return to its 29 level until the mid-50s. The markets just could not pull themselves together, and some of that was monetary, and some of that was international, but a lot of it was terrible errors on the domestic side. So I'm done with my myths, but why am I telling you this now? And if I'm right, why did it take us so long to realize it? I was wondering about this when I wrote the book. I think partly it's because something that we know now, war trumps econ. You like econ, that's very sad, but it's true. War trumps econ. So Roosevelt was right on the war. He went after the bad guys. We forgive him a lot for that. We forgive him the economic policy of the 30s. But that doesn't mean that we should, because presidents are human, they're not idols, and we should look at them as humans and learn about their faults as well as their strengths. And those economic errors that he made in the 1930s are relevant to us today, especially when we look at what we should do during a downturn. The Roosevelt lesson, and a very expensive one it was indeed, was that government intervention often makes it worse. It sounds like it makes it better, but it often makes it worse. Relevant to us and not to be forgotten out of some false nostalgia for the period